Okay, thank you. First of all, what this is going to be about is about improvisation, which is mainly what I do. On the guitar, it happens to be the instrument that I play. There's sort of a myth about jazz improvisation, or improvisation of any kind. And I think a lot of people think that it just comes out of the blue and from inspiration, that you suddenly hear this melody in your head and play it. And that's partially true. But you're all musicians, and you know as well as anybody does that improvisation is really just sort of speeded up composition and putting together things you already know. You already know how to do, and putting together these things in a pretty artistic way, I suppose you could say. And that comes down to really knowing your tools, which is, I think, playing on chord changes, which is knowing what notes sound right over what chords. Okay, let's start with the first one, C major scale. Now we're all pretty familiar with that sound. Now this works over C major 7. There you go. Now that's pretty boring to just play the major scale all the time, right? There are a lot of things you can do with it. Works over a major chord. The second scale is Dorian, so this works over a minor chord, C minor. Now, any of these scales, the way to get something out of the scale is by taking apart all the intervals in the scale. Now here we are on Dorian. What I can do is I can just play the scale. I can play thirds in the scale, which is this pattern. Play fourths in the scale. I can play fifths. Whoops. Play sixths. Play the interval of a seventh in the scale. This is just taking the scales and dividing it up into all the possible intervallic combinations. I can take the scale and start from the first note, make a 4-note arpeggio out of it. I can start from the second note. And this is how you get away from just playing things that just sound like scales. Okay, the third scale is something called the Phrygian scale. It's a major scale starting on the 3rd degree. This also works over C minor, but sort of has a Spanish sound to it. Phrygian. Now, the fourth scale is something called the Lydian mode, which is actually a sort of a substitute for the major scale because it has the augmented fourth in it. Let's hear C major 7 is the Lydian scale. Has that augmented fourth. Now, if you play C major 7, you can hear that that note, F, has to resolve. It's not a very good tension to use against the chord. So that's what's nice about the Lydian scale, is the F's not in there, that the F sharp is. Which is a very sort of hip sound we hear today in music. It's the flatted fifth. Lydian scale is the fifth one, and that works over a dominant seventh chord. So C7. And now we have the Mixolydian. So now all the notes that I was playing then are in the Mixolydian scale, but I've studied it enough to know a lot of the intervallic possibilities. Okay. The sixth one is the Aeolian scale, which once again works over a minor seventh chord. That's Aeolian. Now the seventh one is the Locrian scale, which works over a minor 7 flat 5 chord, which you see a lot in music. It's also called half diminished. Okay, so now we've just gone over the 7 degrees of the major scale. The 7 scales started from the 7 different degrees of the major scale. So these are all major scales. So now what's real important to know is you start learning these just all from C like they are on the paper, and what you end up doing is playing all the possible fingerings for a major scale. And it's a big problem when people start to study the modes. They start to think, okay, if I want to play on D minor, I can play a C major scale, and that works, which in fact is true in theory, but when we're improvising over D minor, the important notes, the notes of gravity, are the chord tones from a D minor seventh chord, which would be the notes D, F, A, and C. And if you're thinking of C major and sort of really lying on the notes C, E, G, and B, then you don't really know what chord you're playing on. Okay, let's just keep going through them, and now we're going to do the melodic minor modes. Okay, the first one is the melodic minor scale itself, and that works over a C minor major 7 chord. Yep. Now, if I start the melodic minor on the 2nd degree, I get a pretty strange scale, actually, that I don't use very much at all. This is like the Dorian flat 2 is what I've called it. Now, I assign my own names to these things, so some other books will show you different names, I'm not sure. Anyway, this is the sound of this one. C minor 7, regular C minor 7. Fits over this sound. That chord is actually D flat major 7 sharp 5 with C in the bass. we'll move on because that's not one of the most commonly used scales. Okay, now in sort of the modern tunes that have been written by jazz composers lately, and this is really coming from 20th century classical music, you see a chord symbol a lot. It's called major 7 sharp 5 chord, and sort of a beautiful ambiguous polytonal sound, and that's this. Okay. And the scale that fits over here is the melodic minor scale, started from the 3rd degree, and I call this scale the Lydian sharp 5. We start the melodic minor scale from the 4th degree. We get a real important scale. It's called the Lydian flat 7. And this is like a Mixolydian scale with a raised 4th, which gives us that flatted 5th on a dominant chord, which is a very hip sound. Can you just play C9 for me? Now, the nice thing about realizing that these are all coming from really from 4 different scales, from the major scale, the melodic minor, the symmetrical diminished, and the whole tone, is that any of these, you start learning patterns in major scale. You learn some intricate patterns, and this applies to all 7 modes. So you can actually use these patterns over minor chords, over major 7 chords, over dominant 7s, and over half diminished chords. And the same thing is true with the melodic minor modes. You can use it over minor major 7, minor 7, major 7 sharp 5, dominant 7 altered, which we'll get to. And this should be becoming more clear to you as the longer you study, that they're really, you can play over any changes using 4 scales. There's also the harmonic minor, which I haven't included in this, which is good too, but it's not quite as useful as these other ones. The 5th degree of the melodic minor scale gives us a thing called the Mixolydian flat 6, which I don't use very much either yet, although if you're watching at home on these tape, I might have started to use it. I don't know. This is one I got to practice, I guess. Play C9 again. Okay, now the interesting thing about the melodic minor scale and the modes that come from this, or if you look just back at the first one, the melodic minor, it's great because it's got all these whole steps in it. Some of you that have been studying scales know enough to realize that the whole tone scale and a bunch of whole steps has a really great angular sound. This is a whole tone. If you look at the melodic minor scale, starting from the note E flat up to B is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes of the whole tone scale. So play C minor major 7. See that? That's all whole tone. The 6th degree is the Locrian natural 2. That works over C minor 7 flat 5 too. And this is great because it has the natural 9. And the regular Locrian scale has a flat 9, which is sort of an avoid note. You can't really lay on it too much. I'll just play the Locrian natural 2 first. That's the natural 9 over a minor 7 flat 5 chord. See, the regular Locrian has that flat 2. Which really has a tendency to resolve. But the natural 2 sounds great. It's a tension that just lays there. Okay, the 7th degree of the melodic minor scale gives us the altered scale, which is a wonderful scale that really starts us getting into the altered sound of a dominant seventh chord. And you know, the way we're doing it now, just taking one scale at a time, you don't really see how they relate, you know, going from one chord to another, but we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, the altered scale, C7 sharp 9. Okay, so now we've gone through 14 of these scales. We'll keep going. The symmetrical diminished scale. Now, this is sort of the stepping stone to chromaticism. And in jazz today, you hear all these chromatic lines that are not really scalular. And a lot of that's coming from the diminished scale. Once again, this works over an altered dominant chord, and only with natural 13 as one of the tensions. And I'll play the symmetrical diminished over the same chord I just played an altered scale over. C7 sharp 9. A lot of classic jazz licks in this scale. Like that's a good one. The symmetrical diminished goes half step, whole step, half step, whole step. It's symmetrical. It goes up a half step, then up a whole step, and then the same thing again. Like that. It's in the symmetrical pattern. Now when I do it in the reverse symmetrical pattern, which would be going whole step, half step, then we come up with a scale that works over a diminished chord. Play C diminished. Same classic jazz patterns work over diminished too. Okay, so there's the diminished scale, and then who can forget the whole tone scale, which is the last one in our group here. Just play like C augmented. Okay, that's the whole tone scale. So now we've sort of real quickly gone through all these scales, which are real basic tools. Okay, I'm sure a lot of you don't completely, have it absorbed and haven't learned all the scales, but are there any questions about this stuff at all and how it applies?
John, you seem, when you were improvising over some of the chords, to be almost using, how should I put it, chord forms that are in the scale other than the chord you're playing.
Exactly, yeah, that's right. What you do is you take the chord forms that are in the scale besides the root and try and improvise all those because you want to get the different configurations that are in the scale. Okay, now the scales not only give us single line things to play, but they help us extend our chords. Now, if you look at the way all these 7-note scales are made up, the symmetrical diminished is an 8-note scale, and the whole tone is a 4-note scale, so they're a little different. They always give, all the scales from the melodic minor and from the major modes give us the first, the third, the fifth, and the seventh of whatever chord the scale works over. See where it says C Lydian, and it says 1, 3, 5, 7. Those are the chord tones. Now every one of these scales is the same. And the notes in between, the passing tones, are also the tensions. And these are the notes that you can stack up over the chord to extend your chords. I mean, you don't want to sit around always playing C7 to F major. You want to put some nice little tensions on it. So if we just look at the Lydian scale, this gives us the 4 notes from the chord, the 1st, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. And it also gives us the 9th, which is the same as the 2nd, the augment 11, which is the same as the augmented 4th, and the 13th. Now, see, I can add these notes to the chord. Just play C major 7. Now, in order to extend that voicing, I can put the 9th on top of it, which is a nice tension to put on top of a major 7th chord. I can put the augment 11, and I can put the 13. Now, you see these groups of chords underneath here. These are all the things. When I'm playing a chart and I just see C major 7th, I don't just play C major 7th. I'll add tensions to it. And a lot of times it depends on what the melody of the song is. I mean, it always does. In case there's something that would clash, I wouldn't do that. But I know I can extend my chord to C major 7 with the 9. I can play C major 7 with the augment 11. I can play C major 7 with the 13 right there. I can play C major 7, 9, augment 11. I can play C major 7, 9, and, oh, I had both in there. C major 7, 9, augment 11. There's that one. I can play C major 7, 9, 13, or 6, 9 is also called. I can play C major 7, augment 11, and 13. So I can use any one of these things. Now, another very interesting thing you can do with all these scales is you can harmonize just the scale itself. Say I have 4 measures of C major 7, right? What do I do besides, which gets to be a little boring, is I can actually harmonize the scale in fourths. Below there's some notes there. That's the C Lydian scale harmonized, in this case, in fourths, which gives you this. So I'm playing along in C major 7. I want to get some interesting tensions. I go. Just using voicings in fourths from the scale. I'm actually just playing that voicing, which is going up in fourths in the scale. Take the first note, go 1, 2, 3, 4. That gives us F sharp. 1, 2, 3, 4. That gives us B natural. 1, 2, 3, 4. That gives us E natural. And I have this voicing, and I just keep moving the whole voicing up the scale. If I want to do the same thing in C Dorian, I could too. Okay, now I sort of switch to some other voicings here too that are just little grabbing notes right out of the chord. At the bottom there you see G Dorian with some notes underneath. What I did there was I just took the interval of a second and a third in the scale. In other words, taking one note from the scale, going up a second, then from that note I go up a third, so I skip one. So actually I started on the note A, even though it's in G Dorian, and I got this voicing, which is a nice G minor 9th chord. And I can just move that right up the Dorian scale too. Back to fourths. So this is a way the modes not only show us how to just to play hip single line patterns and whatever, but they tell you how to extend your chords. Eventually you want to get these under your fingers so you can connect these things, so you can connect them through progressions. Now, I have this thing, it's called scale connections over here. So here's a progression of C major 7, E flat major 7, D major 7, and D flat major 7, right? Now, so that just takes 4 chromatic major scales. And what you want to do is learn these scales in as many positions as you can, so you don't have to make crazy finger stretches unless you have to. And then start being able to play patterns so that it doesn't matter what scale, what chord or what scale you're on, so that the pattern can keep going through the changes. And that's one of the great things about the real great jazz improvisers, is they have this sort of chord scale connection ability, so that it doesn't matter what chord they're on, they can make their line keep moving anyway. So, boy, I hope I can do it. Let's try and play on this progression. So I'm going to just start with you. So we go. Improvising through it. What I'd like to do is to just play one interval through it. I'm just going to take the interval of a sixth, of scale-wise sixth, and just try and play that through it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Six, but that's the sort of scale connection thing you want to have together. So when you're going through the changes, that you can decide what the sounds are going to be, so that you're not running from here to here. Say, oh, now it's Dorian. Oh, shit, and to go through it like that. So you got to watch that. It takes a long time, but there's no big mystery to it, no big secret. It just takes a lot of practice. Okay, now the second example here is not using the same scale. See, before I was either using Lydian or major scales on these major seventh chords. Now the second example is sort of the most frequently used chord progression in popular music. It's 2-5-1, and I guess that's really the most common cadence in music since, I don't know when, but it's real prevalent in all kinds of classical music, all kinds of pop music today. And it's just 2, 5, 1. A D minor, I'll play on D Dorian. Okay, now on G7-13, I will use the G7 symmetrical diminished, the half whole scale. Now on C major 7, I'll use either the Lydian or the Ionian. I'll give myself two choices here. Here I use both fourths, the augmented fourth and the natural fourth, which you can do. Okay, now I'm just going to blow on the progression. I'm going to try and just stay in the scales. So we'll go something like 1, 2, 3, 4. Now just run the scale first. So that was really just running through just scale tones. And you can really make a lot of music out of that, and takes a whole lot of time. But what happens after you start practicing these scales for a while is that you start to, maybe initially you won't really hear the tonality at first, before you start to practice them, but after you practice them for a certain amount of time, what happens is you do hear it in your mind, and you can actually sing, bum 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 bum. I can hear these lines in my head, I think that's actually not what I sang, but it's sort of close. So there's, so it's not just your fingers doing the walking. You got to hear this stuff. It's not doing you any good at all if you can't imagine the sound before you actually play it. If you're just moving, you'll say, I know this is going to work, and I know this is going to work. It's not really going to come out like music. Although, of course, everybody has some fast patterns that if they play it real fast, their vocal chops couldn't keep up with what their fingers can do. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about really, 99% of the things you play, you hear in your head. They're not just experimental technical things. And a really good way to do that is to just study the modes, and to sit down and practice playing on C minor for 2 hours on the Dorian scale, if you can make 2 hours. If you can only make 10 minutes, that's good too. Just only practice as much as you can really get some work done. So we've gone over all these scales only to come up with this thing at the end here that says passing tones. And that any scale tone may be approached by a chromatic note a half step above or below. So what that means is you can play any note. So, that's sort of really true, too, because like I said at the very beginning, the scales are not everything, and there are a whole lot of great jazz players out there, especially of the sort of older school, that don't really know the modes, but use them all the time. But the fact of the matter is to play D minor, that when I'm going to play on this scale, it's not always going to just be D Dorian. That's because you can connect, and one of the basic things in music is connecting with passing tones. And I've sort of set up this little chart here that says you can connect any scale tone with a half step above, a half step below, or the double chromatic approach. So that gives us little patterns, like if I'm just going to maybe do a thing coming into every chord tone from a half step above or below. Play D minor. fine, you know, but it has all these wrong notes in it, like this. But the fact is that that note resolves. And I can do the same thing from below. So this is really away from the modal concept, and you were just thinking approach notes now. And then there's the double chromatic approach. And this really leads us to chromaticism, which is the ultimate goal of not having to stick with these scales, but to be able to fill in between the scale notes with chromatics. So now I'm just going to play on that progression, the example 2, the 2-5-1. And I'm not going to really think about the scales. I'm going to allow myself to just play what I feel, even though my real basis is this scalular playing. I won't make any bones about it. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's chromatic right there. Chromatic. But it all depends on where you end, if it's tonal, right? Okay. So, we've already broken the main rule of scales. So, just goes to show that there's no one way to do any of this stuff. Continuing on to page 6, we have pentatonic scales. And that all pentatonic means is 5-note scales. And it's probably one of the first things you learn is the blues scale, which is really a minor pentatonic scale. That's the second one here on the list. The major pentatonic scale is. Then there's something I call the dominant pentatonic. Now these little 5-note scales are really part of the other modes. In other words, each one of these 5 notes, you can find them in another 7 or 8-note mode. So this is C major pentatonic. That's a major pentatonic started from the chord root. Okay, the minor pentatonic is starting from the 6th of the key we're in. So that would be starting from A over C. No, C major. Actually the same exact scale as C major pentatonic. Now let's take a major pentatonic started from the 2nd. This is nice. It gives you augment 11. Or we can make that a dominant pentatonic. Okay? Or we can take a minor pentatonic and start it from the 7th. Okay, now for minor 7th chords, we can play a minor pentatonic started from the root of the chord we're playing on. So C minor 7 would be a C minor pentatonic. Now we can take a minor pentatonic from the 5th, a 5th away from the chord we're playing on. And we can take a minor pentatonic from the 2nd. Okay, now for dominant 7th chords, the first category being what I call tonic or 2 dominant 7. This is like the first chord of a blues usually, or in the song The Girl from Ipanema, it goes a G7. It's a 2-7. It's a dominant chord that doesn't have altered tensions, that has like natural 13, natural 9. We can use these different pentatonics. Okay, so play C7. major pentatonic started from the root. Dominant pentatonic started from the root. Okay, let's try dominant pentatonic started from the second. Okay, minor pentatonic started from the fifth. Now that has that F natural in there, which gives us the sus4. Okay, now, the other family of dominant chords would be the altered dominant, things with the flat 9, sharp 9, flat 13, augment 11, that sort of sound, which is usually a 5-7 chord resolving to a 1. In this case, that's C7 altered going to 1 major. Okay, now on this I can put this slick little thing. I can play a minor pentatonic, a flatted third above the root of the chord. So. Now, minor 7 flat 5 chords, I can use a dominant pentatonic started a flatted 6 away from the root of the minor 7 that we're playing, minor 7 flat 5. So C minor 7 flat 5, I would use an A flat dominant pentatonic. Okay, now at the bottom of that page, I've given an example of a progression that goes 2 minor, 5, 7, 1 major, 6 dominant, which is a very common chord progression. And I can superimpose these pentatonics over it, and you'll hear McCoy Tyner and people that sort of play out of the post-Coltrane school using these type of pentatonics a lot. So let's play the progression first, just straight 4, okay? That's D minor 7, G augmented 7, C major 7, A augmented 7, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 2 minor 7, 5, 7, 1 major 7, 6 dominant. So I can play this. That's A minor pentatonic, B flat minor pentatonic, B minor pentatonic, C minor pentatonic. Okay, so you might hear that sound a lot nowadays in jazz type improvisation. I really I have a blast with these things, and the longer I know them, and the more I mess around with playing on these things, the more little twists and turns I find in the harmony, and it's really a lot of fun. And like I said, the longer you lay with these things, the more they really become your friends. And I can't suggest anything stronger than really trying to learn a tune and really memorizing it, not just reading it out of a fake book and not really knowing the whole thing, but trying to. It's better that you learn 1 tune a year than to learn half of 6 tunes in a year.
John, is there anything special that you do to develop your right-hand picking technique?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's right. That was on the other page. Well, I have very bad right-hand technique in that I can't alternate pick very well, and so what I've sort of learned to do, and what a lot of other players lately have learned to do, and this is sort of the Jim Hall legato type school, is to not actually pick every note, but using hammer-ons, where the second note is actually hammered on, it's not actually picked, and using pull-offs, which is the same process in reverse, where the second note is the string, you pull the string. to get the second note instead of picking it, and finger stretches, not finger stretches, finger slides, like that. I've been able to learn how to play fairly quickly, and to me sometimes it's even a smoother sound than alternate picking. So if I were to play a C major scale, I would a lot of times go, I play the first one, then hammer it on, then pick the second and the third, then hammer on, then pick the next one and the next one, then hammer on, and the same thing coming down. Except for that's using pull-offs. Now if I try to do that just with up and down picking and try and do it fast, it comes a yick. You know, I can't get nothing out of it. It sounds like really bad. But I can go. And that's really using a legato left-hand technique and not picking every note. Now, an arpeggio, the second thing is the C major arpeggio, is actually done like this. Downstroke, upstroke, hammer on, downstroke, finger slide, upstroke, downstroke, hammer on. So you can see with the little V's and stuff are down and upstrokes, and the line going over is either hammer on or pull off. So that comes out like this. Which is much easier to me than going. I mean, I cannot do that. I just can't get that happening, but I can get this. So that's sort of the legato technique. Jim Hall, I know John Abercrombie employs that a lot. Mick Goodrick, who was my teacher, and he also taught Pat Metheny, who employs that technique a lot. And a lot of the younger players use that technique, and a lot of the reason why we can do that is because of light gauge strings. If it's real heavy gauge strings, it's very hard to do that. So this really didn't come in until more recently. You had another question about that?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what was the difference in the album you did with Larry Coryell and Joe Beck, and how their playing styles were so different? It seems that Coryell uses more of that style.
Yeah, he really uses that. Well, I mean, he's got that kind of right hand. You know, he can do that. And a lot of people, you know, I mean, well, somebody like John McLaughlin can really get all sorts of expression out of that, you know, but other people get a little tighter, you know, it sounds a little tight. But Larry's one of these people that really has a great right hand and can do it and doesn't need to slide around a lot like I do. But I think you know, after a certain point, it doesn't matter. It's the music is what, you know, comes through more than anything, not somebody's little technical thing. And that's what they do with their technique. Because technique is only, real technique is using what you know how to do in an artistic way, as averse to being so caught up in physical technique that you're not able to create, which a lot of people have that problem. Everybody goes through a thing where they're really trying to get some chops. They sit around and practice scales all day, and then when they go to the gig, what can they do? They can practice, they can play their scales real fast, which doesn't have to help you very much as far as really doing something.
John, we've been talking about, or you've been talking about changes that happen relatively quickly. What is your approach toward a tune that has a static portion that you're
okay, this is a whole other aspect of playing that's real important now, especially that there are more sort of modal type tunes around now. And first of all, I would say, you know, it's your basic scale that you're on, but after that gets boring after a while. So what I think Coltrane and these guys did was started to get the sound of chord changes in a one-chord thing. And that's by picking out all the triads and stuff inside the scale and all the inner tonalities they can make sound like more than one tonality. And then actually playing outside of the key, which is another real gray area, which is just like chord substitutions. I mean, it sounds good. You make it work. You go from point A to point B. The obvious thing being, you know, up a half step and back down, and you get the tension. But then, you know, that's the real sort of basic way. And then you learn more different, ways to do it. And then you start just going for it. You start to learn some chromatic type licks, and you start to learn all the different tension. I mean, that a flat 9 on a major 7th chord is actually a little more tense than a flat 6 sometimes, you know. And you start to really, you're talking in terms of amounts of dissonance. We could just play on D minor for a while. And I'll start inside and I'll try and take it a little more outside. So, back to our favorite rhythm here. Trying to use some outside notes and stuff, and that's a real touchy subject, and some people really have it down really formalized, and other people just go for it, and then, you know, again, it's licks. It's really coming from licks. I'm learning licks that Coltrane played on So What or Impressions, and why does that work? How does it work? I don't know why it works. I'll try using that lick, and it works, you know. And then that immediately gets sort of transfigured into your own thing. Listening to Miles' sort of version, I mean, he's such a great guy at learning the little notes in the cracks, and who knows what they are? I don't know. It's rough. It's rough to really formalize any sort of mysterious thing like that. But you know, all of a sudden, everybody has this experience of hitting this note. And wow, where did that come from? And then you analyze it as much as you can, and you try to use it when the time is right. And we should never ever forget that a lot of this stuff, the rhythmic thrust of where you put it on the beat and what happened before and what happened after affects what it is. So it's how you set yourself up, first of all, and also where you put it on the beat, you know, and what's happening in relation around you. And when you're improvising with other players, right here, I'm playing over this real static rhythmic accompaniment. And that changes when you get on the bandstand where the bass player and the drummer, and they're all shading and giving colors too. So much of it is responding to the rest of the band that makes the music interesting.
Can you talk about your instruments a little bit? And I use a Gibson also?
Actually, now I'm just using the Ibanez, this guitar, and I play acoustic guitar too, and I have an Ibanez acoustic guitar. I mean, a lot of people have a whole lot of instruments. I mainly play electric guitar, and this is pretty much it. I have a polytone amplifier with a special reverb that was built by an amplifier maker and designer here named Harry Colby. And I'm sort of a real minimalist when it comes to equipment, you know. Because, you know, you get the sound you hear in your head. The sound comes from your fingers. I mean, I'm playing an electric instrument, and I couldn't get the same sound out of any guitar or anything like that. But so much of it comes from just getting good equipment and learning how to use that, and until you find something that has a good sound, and then it's from the hands. Your ear can be improved just like any other part of the music. I mean, you can improve your rhythm, you can improve your ear, you can improve all aspects of music through working on it. Nothing like stealing from some horn players or piano players. You know, listen to the drummers too. I mean, you know, just for different figures. A lot of times I'll play stuff that just directly comes from drummers.